From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum. I'm Joshua Irvin, a reporter with WisPolitics. For this week's episode, I spoke to Senator Ron Johnson the morning after President Trump wrapped up his State of the Union address. We spoke about the president's speech, and the senator shared his thoughts on immigration enforcement, the global tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court last week, and a restrictive new voter ID law before the Senate. We're speaking the morning after the president's State of the Union address. Off the bat, I want to ask, what's your biggest takeaway from President Trump's speech last night?
I thought it was an excellent speech. I have to admit, I wasn't really thinking that an hour and 45-minute speech that I would be enjoying it that much, but I did. I really thought the remarkable moment occurred when President Trump just asked a pretty simple request from the Democrats to reaffirm that the first duty of American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. And Democrats would not stand for that. They sat on their hands. They also sat on their hands, by the way, when we, mourned the loss, celebrated the life of the young Ukrainian woman who was brutally murdered on a train. They wouldn't stand and show support for a young girl who was recovering beautifully from grievous injuries when she was struck by illegal immigrant driving an 18-wheeler. So it just made no sense whatever. And I don't think it really showed on TV cameras, the shots I've seen, the stark difference in terms of what Republicans were celebrating, what President Trump was celebrating. He was celebrating America, American heroes, and he was highlighting individuals, and Democrats just sat on their hands. It was very remarkable. Quite honestly, it was unbelievable.
All right. I was hoping to speak with you about the immigration issue. The excuse me, sorry. Like you said, the president dedicated a lot of time last night to talking about immigration, about his immigration enforcement campaign, and his deportation campaign. Democrats are very opposed to that effort. They have blocked funding to the Department of Homeland Security in response to some actions by federal immigration officers in recent weeks, including the fatal shooting of two U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. I wanted to ask, what's the status of negotiations on that DHS funding? I know that you've said you would support some reforms for immigration officers, requiring them to wear body cameras. Are there other reforms you would support? I guess starting with that question of what's the status of negotiations, and then.
Well, I noticed you mentioned the two martyrs created by Democrat politicians who have trained their activists, encouraged them to put themselves into harm's way to obstruct justice, knowing people would get hurt. Two of them got killed tragically. But you're not asking questions about Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, and the many, 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 many other American citizens who were either brutally raped, killed by vehicular homicide, murdered by the individuals that Joe Biden and Democrats allowed into this country through their open border policy. And that's the issue here. We have an enormous mess on our hands caused by Democrats, and rather than acknowledge the fact that they did something awful for this country, allowing millions of people flooding here, including that, by the way, is over 650,000 convicted felons, 15,000 convicted murderers, 20,000 convicted people convicted of sexual assault that are not detained. Came to this country through open borders. So that's the problem that President Trump is trying to address. And Democrats, again, rather than trying to help us clean up their mess, they're obstructing justice. They're encouraging their supporters to go out and put themselves into harm's way. They got their martyrs. Now they're exploiting them. So again, I think it was very appropriate for President Trump to talk about the fact that this is a mess that Democrats created, together with 40-year high inflation, the devaluation of our currency, all kinds of strife around the world because of American weakness under Joe Biden and Democrat control. So again, that's my perspective of it, and I think that the difference came out very loud and clear in the State of the Union address last night.
Your point is taken, but do you have any updates on the status of negotiations around DHS funding?
Well, again, I'm not a big fan of the federal government. But the enumerated powers are certainly national defense, defense of our homeland. And for Democrats to want to defund police, that didn't go over real well for them. Now they want to defund Department of Homeland Security, which includes FEMA, uh, TSA, uh, obviously Customs and Border Patrol and ICE. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And right now, those negotiations are primarily between the White House and Democrats, but it's Democrats that shut down the government for a record, what, 42, 43 days. Now they've shut down DHS, and I can't explain why they would do this to the American public.
All right. Moving on to another topic that came up last night, the matter of tariffs. The Supreme Court last week struck down some of the president's global tariffs. He says he's going to find another way to enact them. Speaking about the ones that were struck down, American importers and consumers have paid more than 90% of those added costs, according to a study cited in the Wall Street Journal. Do you think U.S. companies should get that money back, or for that matter, consumers?
Well, this was a case that I think was crying out for unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. I've read both the opinion and the dissents. Justices on both sides make very good points. So I primarily blame Congress for writing very ambiguous and really sloppy bills. So that they drop these bills and put them in the laps of the executive branch. So presidents interpret them differently. Then people challenge those interpretations. Then they take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ends up with a divided decision and doesn't even address the $175 billion that's already been collected. What I would have liked to see the Supreme Court do is just say, okay, board's board, that's been paid. This was ambiguous enough. It wasn't an unanimous decision. We'll let that tariff revenue remain in the Treasury coffers, and this decision will be applied forward. But again, Congress has other laws that they've basically given their constitutional authority to the president to inflict and impose tariffs. They're probably a little more difficult to impose than the IEPA, which is why President chose that one. But there are other laws on the books so he can use to enforce tariffs as well. But again, I primarily blame Congress for writing awful and ambiguous laws.
All right. Uh, Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about the Save America Act, the another piece of legislation the president brought up last night. Asked John Thune by name to push that legislation through the Senate. You've called on the Senate to nuke the filibuster in order to bring a vote on that bill. Senator Mike Lee is pushing to force a quote unquote talking filibuster, which is sort of procedural war of attrition. The Senate Majority Leader opposes, I believe, weakening the legislative filibuster in any way. After President Trump's remarks last night, has anything changed with that situation? Is there signs of new support for either your proposal or Senator Lee's? Has Senator Thune said anything to you since then?
Well, first of all, overwhelming majorities of the American public, regardless of their political ideology, support a simple measure to help secure elections of voter ID, something like 80%. And so, at a minimum, what we ought to do in the Senate is bring the Save America Act to the floor and make Democrats take days to explain why they are in opposition to what 80% of Americans support. A common sense measure to help secure elections to make sure that their legitimate vote isn't canceled out by a fraudulent one. Again, that's a very common sense control that the only reason Democrats can support or oppose that is because they want to make it easy to cheat. They've flooded this country with millions of people. They've expanded absentee ballots, which the Carter-Bacon Commission pointed to as probably the greatest source of potential fraud in our election system. They doubled that during 2020. They want mail-in ballots. They want automatic registration. Again, Democrats want to make it easy to cheat. Gee, I wonder why. Republicans want to make it impossible to cheat. We want to make sure that legitimate votes aren't canceled out by fraudulent ones. Happy to make it easy to vote, but almost difficult to cheat. The Save America Act would be one of the controls we could put in place to make it difficult to cheat.
On that note, in Wisconsin's case, Wisconsin does have voter ID. It does not require proof of citizenship to register. It also allows student IDs to be considered valid voter ID, which this bill does not. But a state elections commission report from 2024 found only that local election clerks referred on only 46 cases of suspected voter fraud in the state out of 3.4 million ballots cast. I guess what would you say to critics who argue this legislation is going to add new barriers to voting in order to address a very small fraction of those cases that are potentially fraudulent?
Safe and secure elections are just crucial for our body politic, for our democracy. And offering proof of citizenship and voter ID is a minimal requirement. I think it's certainly a good goal of the federal government to just enforce that standard. Biggest problem in Wisconsin elections, we have something like more than 7 million people on our voter rolls because Wisconsin Election Commission refuses to clean them up when we only have a little more than 3 million voters. So we need to first clean up our voter rolls. That is creating instances of fraud. And again, some basic common sense controls, federally mandated, but administered by the states, I think is entirely fitting and proper.
Okay. Senator Johnson, thank you very much for taking the time.
Have a good day.
Thank you again to Senator Johnson, to Spectrum, and to you, the listener. I'm Joshua Irvin with WisPolitics, and this has been Capitol Chats.